You shall not commit adultery. Before we go very far in this video, it seems certain that we have to define exactly what adultery is. According to the Talmud, adultery is defined as a man who has sexual relations with a married woman, not his wife. Now, I'm someone who has a little bit of common sense, so I can immediately see a little bit of a loophole. The man is married, but the woman isn't. The woman who has sexual relations with the married man is guilty of adultery. A married man who has sexual relations with an unmarried woman didn't. This is how, of course, a woman can be charged with adultery, but the man isn't. Seems a little bit odd to me. Now, what exactly is the punishment for adultery? Let's look at Leviticus chapter 20, verse 10. The man who commits adultery with another man's wife, that commits adultery with his companion's wife, the male adulterer and the female adulterer shall be executed. Executed how? Read your Old Testament over and over and over and over and over again. The punishments for, well, almost everything in the Old Testament is execution by stoning. Now, of course, you might say, well, why do laws of adultery exist here in the Old Testament and otherwise? Well, this all has to do with family values, doesn't it? Well, it's easy to determine the Bible has a lot to say about family values. Let's turn to 2 Samuel. And David went to his house at Jerusalem, and the king seized the 10 women concubines who he had left there to be in charge of the house, and put them in prison. He gave them a ration of food, but did not go into them. So they were imprisoned until the day of their death, living in widowhood. 2 Samuel chapter 20, verse 3. That is Old Testament family values. That's why the prohibition against abortion or adultery, that's fairly. We need, I think, to look at the nature of sexual type sins that are talked about in the Old Testament. These include such things as adultery, fornication, homosexual activity, bestiality, and things of that sort. Why did these laws exist? Why was this considered such an abomination to God? You have to look at how religion was looked at. What time frame am I talking about? Well, of course, 14th century, 15th century BCE. People did not just simply change religion back in those days. The strength of religion was determined by the strength of the army that supported it. The army was determined to be every male aged 20 years and older, physically able to fight. To commit adultery or homosexual activity or bestiality and things of that sort meant that you could not properly have children raised in proper family unions. In order to not have children, that meant you had less people, 20 years of age and older, able to draw the sword, able to go to war. Therefore, you reduce the strength of the army of Jehovah. Believe it or not, that is the real reason. To look at how all this is applicable, I want you to consider one of the religions that I examined in my essay about comparative theology for my global civilizations course. I looked at, among other things, Zoroastrianism. Mostly because my professor talked about it and I wanted to look it up. One is not allowed to convert to Zoroastrianism. One does not marry into the religion. Somebody who is in the religion is not allowed to marry somebody who is not already a member of the religion. How does one become Zoroastrian? Well, you have to be born into it. Specifically, you have to be Parsi Iranian. Parsi Iranians are only allowed to marry other Parsi Iranians, just as in Old Testament times the Hebrew people were only allowed to marry other Hebrew people, and to make it even more convoluted, you had to marry within your own tribe. Today's Zoroastrianisms are complaining. They say that their numbers in their religion are declining. Of course, you'd have to look at any recent Pew study to find out that the numbers of just about every religion in the world are on the decline. So this is not surprising. It would make it a little bit better if you say look at Reform Judaism and say, well, anybody can become Jewish. But Zoroastrians aren't allowing this. They're not allowing converts, and they're not allowing their members to marry people outside of their religion out of fear that the children being born will not be raised Zoroastrian. In other words, they do not want the members of their religion to choose what religion they want to follow. This is bigotry. This is intolerance. But to be fair, this also exists in Judaism, in Islam, in most Christian churches. As a matter of fact, in a lot of Christian churches, it's even worse. Not only are you not allowed to marry somebody who is not a fellow Christian, oftentimes you're not allowed to marry somebody who is of a different race or ethnicity. Racial intolerance. After all, this is the Bible. Thus saith the word of God. There it is in black and white and sometimes red. Family values that we can all agree with and apply directly to our society. If you ask me, I think that the Seventh Commandment is completely debunked.